Hello, you're watching Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel on the 15th of September 2011. In today's programme, we report on a recent Employment Appeal Tribunal decision, which is a helpful reminder of the limits of an employer's duty to make reasonable adjustments in disability discrimination cases. We'll also comment on the Employment Tribunal and Appeal Tribunal statistics that have recently been published for 2010-2011. And finally, a quick look at some recent guidance on how to help employees with childcare and the tax and national insurance treatment of workplace nurseries, employer-contracted childcare and childcare vouchers. First up, Salford NHS Primary Care Trust recently enjoyed a successful outcome in its appeal against Mrs Smith, an employee who had been on long-term sick for over a year and had brought a claim for disability discrimination and constructive dismissal. It's an interesting case as it reminds us that the reasonable adjustments duty is limited to substantive adjustments rather than procedural steps such as consultations, investigations and trial periods, as these don't in themselves alleviate the disadvantage that a provision, criterion or practice causes a disabled employee. Nigel Grundy, an employment law barrister at 9 St John Street Chambers, comments on this case in more detail for us. Nigel represented Salford NHS Trust and so has valuable first-hand knowledge of the case and is well placed to comment on what the decision means for employers going forward.
This case is a helpful reminder that there are limits to what an employer is expected to do to comply with the duty to make reasonable adjustments. The duty under the Equality Act is the same as it was under the Disability Discrimination Act. It's often forgotten that reasonable adjustments are primarily concerned with enabling the disabled person to remain in or return to work. Matters such as consultations and trials, exploratory investigations and the like do not qualify as reasonable adjustments. They are procedural steps and do not in themselves enable the disabled person to return to work. This case concerned a manager of a team of occupational therapists who was off work suffering with chronic fatigue syndrome. She resigned while still on paid sick leave when her employers were still investigating with her what was to be done. The two proposed reasonable adjustments considered by the EAT were firstly, a failure by the employer to produce something for the claimant to do by way of rehabilitation, not necessarily productive work, so as to allow her to go to her GP to say, "Doctor, this is what they suggest I do, involving light duties 2 to 3 hours per day, 2 days per week. Will you please sign me off to go back to work?" The second was a career break. The EAT found that these were not reasonable adjustments. Proposals to be put to a GP for some form of rehabilitation is just that. It is at best a procedural step rather than adjustment in itself. Formulating proposals do not in themselves alleviate the substantial disadvantage suffered by the disabled person. A career break is not designed for the type of situation where someone is off ill. All it would achieve would be to change the label for the disabled person's absence from long-term sick leave to a career break. It would not enable the disabled person to return to work. Hence, it is not a reasonable adjustment.
Thanks, Nigel. The Employment Tribunal Service has recently published the Employment Tribunal and EAT Statistics 2010-2011. It's a report detailing key tribunal statistics, including the number of cases brought and the levels of tribunal awards during the period from the 1st of April 2010 to the 31st of March 2011. Nigel again talks us through some of the key findings of the report and what, in his view, they mean for employers.
Although there has been a slight drop in the number of claims made to employment tribunals from about 236,000 down to about 218,000, they are still very high, and there's an increase from about 70,000 from the year 2008-2009. Inevitably, that will lead to delays in the employment tribunal system. Cases are likely to be taken out at the last minute, and that will lead to an increase in costs for employers. The number of discrimination claims has remained fairly static, but there has been a 32% increase in age discrimination claims people, it seems, are more and more aware of their age discrimination rights. As a result, I think HR need to be more alert to the possibility of age discrimination claims. There has been a small number of reinstatement or re-engagement orders made, according to the statistics. Overall, the number of orders remains very small. In total, only out of 8 cases, and the majority of cases result in compensation only. The same can be said about costs award. They remain relatively small in number, and they tend to be made against employers rather than the claimant employee. The highest awards have been made and continue to be made in discrimination cases, most notably recently in age discrimination cases. One thing which can also probably be said about the statistics is that the averages shown don't really help, because all cases are different and they have to be judged on their individual merits.
Thanks, Nigel. It's also interesting to note that of the claims heard by tribunals, only 12% were successful. And so whilst the number of tribunal claims overall is incredibly high, it's still quite difficult to win. And finally, Her Majesty Revenue and Customs has this month published guidance for employers on how to help their employees with childcare and the tax and national insurance treatment of workplace nurseries, employer contracted childcare and childcare vouchers. You can access a copy of the guidance by clicking on the link below the screen. The guidance provides a useful flowchart to assess whether a workplace nursery qualifies for the tax exemptions. It also includes tables to check whether directly contracted childcare and childcare vouchers are a taxable benefit and liable for national insurance contributions, what the conditions for tax and NIC exemptions are, and what records must be kept by employers. It also contains information on the interaction with tax credits and details of the costs upon which tax relief is available. It's certainly worth a read, particularly if you frequently face queries on this often complex issue. So that's all for today from Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.